I was a good white person. I was a do-gooder.
To be white in this country is to be encapsulated in this social milieu, this realm that not only allows denial of the issue of racism, but really mandates denial.
I empathize with people of color. I understood the history.
What gets hidden is our fear. What gets hidden is our guilt.
This country was built on the backs of indigenous peoples, on the backs of slaves, and on the backs of Chinese immigrant labor. And we see the same pattern continuing today.
I have to know this history because this history is within me.
The shame is too deep to look at. Please don't make me look at this.
We talk about it as something that happened in the past.
Everyone said we don't have a race problem in America anymore. And it festered into the LA riots. And then everyone said, oh, maybe we do have a race problem.
Walking down the street, walking in a bank, going to look for a house, buy a car. I got the mask of whiteness. The advantage is always there.
We mean well, and yet we don't believe that we have any more work to do on ourselves. We cease looking at ourselves. What Audre Lorde talks about as the painful and necessary experience of excavating the truth about racism.
When I'm walking down the street, I like to smile at black people, don't you? That warm, cuddly puppies and babies smile. To let them know I'm friendly, guilty, sorry. It's all been a really bad joke, huh? I'm nervous, I'm angry. Not at you, but me. But you remind me that I hurt you, and now I hurt too, and that you will never be sorry for me.
A lot of times when folks hear you grew up in California, they think, oh, California is very diverse, but I found it's also very segregated. So even though I was in a town that had quite a bit of diversity, it was not anything that I was aware of.
The politics of the town, pretty conservative. I guess you can see it most when you watch the 4th of July parades. Confederate flags will appear in the Boy Scout troops.
I never saw African American people. They lived in a different part of town. They rode a different bus. They went to different schools. The only time I ever saw anybody of color was when we went over to St. Paul's West Side to buy shoes. And we would go past Our Lady of Lourdes and look inside, and of course it looked much different from the church that we went to.
I grew up in a household hearing racial slurs where my mom would correct my father and say, we don't, that's not a nice thing to say, about those people. My father had actually been very close with an Asian American family. Their family was interned during World War II, and my father had helped to protect his house along with a lot of other friends. But still, I heard comments about, the Japs.
My parents spoke oftentimes in racist ways. They used the N-word often. When I was young, I really didn't know what that meant. But I sort of got that I was supposed to stay away from people of color, particularly black people. That they were going to take something from me, they were going to hurt me in some way.
My family's history goes back to Governor Randolph of Virginia. My father's family goes back to John Quincy Adams. There's a very distant link to Thomas Jefferson. I know my family's history. I know that my family owned slaves. We used to spend summers down at the Plantation House in Wilmington, and we used to play in the slave quarters.
My first exposure to what I think of as outright racism came from my grandmother when I was perhaps 6, 7, or 8. We had driven to visit her in Pennsylvania, and at the end of our visit, I ran into the kitchen to kiss my grandmother's cook, Bessie, goodbye.
Give me some sugar.
I loved Bessie. Then I ran into the parlor and kissed my grandmother goodbye. And she shrieked at me in a voice I had never heard before. And she said, "I bet you kissed me with the same little old lip you kissed Bessie." I never touched Bessie again.
I had some adopted cousins on my dad's side, and 2 of them were African American, and the rest of my cousins were white. I didn't necessarily know the significance of that until actually when I moved to Texas, and one of my cousins came to visit us, and one of my girlfriends was extremely uncomfortable around my cousin. And I started to realize the power of silence. I just remember feeling the conflict of wanting acceptance and wanting truth. Wanting to be proud of my love for my Black cousins, and still wanting friends, and feeling scared that I would lose my friends if I was open about my love for my cousins.
My father basically raised me from about when I was about 4 or 5. Things sort of started out normal. They're trying to have a family and a house. And then my mother was hospitalized when I was 4 or 5. They didn't talk about what was going on or whatever, but she was in a mental hospital. She was at County General, Los Angeles. That's where she met the man who became my stepfather, who was Black, and he was in the mental ward as well. The story on him was that he was a returning prisoner of war from Korea, and that he had been tortured. He was the most hopeful person in my life growing up, because he was warm and told great stories. And that was the only real feeling I ever had of family, was when he and my half-brother and my mother were together, and that was a place where I could go when I was welcome. My father was pretty upset about being dumped for a Black mental patient, which is essentially what happened. So I got to listen to him spew, racism about that a lot. I was very aware from age 6 that the world had to change for my family to stay together, because I could tell just walking down the street that the same street, 2 different days, people looked differently at my mother and all of us, at our family, when my stepfather was in the picture as when he wasn't in the picture.
I was born in Thailand, and I was raised in Thailand and Argentina. And then we came to the U.S. when I was 4, and I grew up on a dairy farm, my father's family dairy farm in western New York, which is predominantly a white area. And so that was very jarring, I think is the word, coming from countries that were predominantly people of color and people that I connected very deeply with, and then coming back to the U.S. One incident that I had when I was growing up, I think I was about 7. I was in the backwoods with a group of boys. I don't remember it entirely clearly, but I do remember what happened there. They were standing around talking, and they used various racial epithets and talked about women, and then I was assaulted, and there was, all the elements were there, and I think it was just a profoundly life-changing moment for me, because I just knew on a deep level that survival, and racism, and sexism, and violence, and there were class issues involved as well, even though they were white boys, that all of these things were very connected.
My best friend is Chinese American, and we were both in a theater performance for our high school of South Pacific. And somehow I had gotten the stand-in role for Mary, and My friend was cast as sort of an island girl extra. And in one of the rehearsals, I was standing in the back of the theater and the lights were dim and the teacher was there and she was saying to these extras who were the island girls to kind of titter and to say the word French fries, but with an accent. And she singled out my friend. And my friend said, French fries. And she said, no, come on, you know what I mean. Say French flies. And my friend, I saw her eyebrows go up and I saw her say, French fries. And there was a big pause. And this teacher persisted and she said, no, say French flies. I was so far away from her, the distance between us with that auditorium and the dark light and the bright light shining on her. I have such a vivid recollection of that because I wanted to be able to just stop it all magically. It was so hideous. And she said again, French fries. And then she ran off the stage.
My whole family is working class people and farmers, all the way up to me, first one that went to college. But for some reason, I wanted to go off campus and relate to folks who were only a 10-minute bike ride away from Yale. I got invited in to do a social service project with kids on the street. I mean, there's sort of relative poverty and there's abject poverty. One of the young men, a little guy named Freddie, this guy was in abject poverty, much more like a third world situation. This is like a 11, 12-year-old kid, a kid that was living, way out on the edge. I became somebody he could reach out to beyond where he was. And he also, again, reached into me. He was one of the kids that, in terms of the heart level, just made me feel like, the YMCA program isn't cutting it here. Freddie's situation was one that was going to take massive social change. Also at the time, New Haven was burning every summer around issues of race. I was curious about that. The fact that the country that I had learned about and trusted in as, freedom, equality, justice, all things I learned in my civics classes in high school, is actually burning itself down around issues of difference. And that's one of the things that linked me into asking the deeper questions. Why is this happening? What's going on here?
When I first got to college in 1986, the sheriff of Jefferson Parish announced publicly that he was going to have his deputies stop every black man driving a rinky-dink car, was the words he used, because he assumed that they were up to no good. Again, the words that he used. And never had we, as white anti-apartheid activists, made a connection, which was so obvious, of course, to any person of color. To us, it was separate issues.
Pretty traditionally, if you had 5 black men together at any given time, there was a cop. The black fraternities, they would present their pledges. And I think it was within like 10 minutes of them just lining up, walking in their row, showing up, cops were there. And they didn't break it up, they just stood.
I knew one black author, and that was Langston Hughes. And that was another real breaking point for me, was when my students wanted black poets. And here I am with a theater English degree, and I couldn't give them any. And then I started learning from them, because then we did For Colored Girls Who Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough, and we did Leroy Jones, and we did Gwendolyn Brooks. And I kept thinking, why don't I know these people?
I went to a conference on racism, and there was a black woman who was a professor in a college, and she said, I wake up every single morning of my life and think, I am a black person. And I thought, God, what would that be like? And she said, how many of you wake up every morning and think, I am a white person?
I have understood more and more the 1,000 little cuts of everyday living for people.
We would go into a store together, and instantly the clerks would become aware of his presence and begin to follow him around the store. And they paid no attention to me.
Once I got stopped for speeding outside the town, and there was a Mexican-American girl with me, and I didn't get a ticket. And the cop walked back to his car, and I said, Narda, I really feel bad. What if this had been you or your brother? And she said, yeah.
He and I were driving, not in the same car, but caravanning down to Chicago from Milwaukee to do, strangely enough, a multicultural training that we both do together now. And we were traveling along at freeway speeds, 65, 70 miles an hour, till we hit the city limits of Skokie, Illinois. He was behind me, and all of a sudden he slowed up dramatically. He started going 50 miles an hour, and the speed zone was 55. We got outside of Skokie. He sped up again. When we got to the place to do the workshop, you know, I said, what was that about? And he turned to me and he said, you just don't get it, Rick. Skokie is where the KKK meets every year and has a rally. They arrest people just for the crime of driving while black, and I have to be very careful when I drive through a city like that.
Living in Iowa, what we would see a lot with violence against women is that if you were raped by a fairly affluent young man who happened to be white and was in a fraternity, there was no hope of getting justice. And yet we would see that prosecutions could go through so easily for people of color, for defendants of color, that they would go through and become convicted.
We were talking about friendships, and those of us who are white are frequently interested in friendships, and we want to be somebody's friend.
Hi, my name is Judy. Would you like to have tea with me?
And this Latina said to me, you know, when you want to be my friend, you get up and you walk across the room, you shake hands, you say, hi, my name is Francie Kendall, what's your name? And you begin a relationship. When people of color decide that they will again try to be friends with a white person, we are crawling on our, and this is what this woman said, I'll never forget it, we are crawling on our knees over the broken shards of relationships that where we thought we could trust someone.
Being raised in a nice white liberal home where your mother gets a racist teacher fired, you come to understand racism, like a lot of white folks, as this very obvious, overt manifestation of bigotry, and you don't see yourself perpetuating that, and therefore you separate yourself from the problem, even when you're manifesting the problem.
I have a couple brothers-in-law who are firemen. And one of them, in the station that he worked at, he became friends with an African-American fireman. And he really did like him. But he always referred to him to me as his black friend. And it was like his friendship with Dwayne proved that he was really a fair-minded person. Whereas I knew perfectly well that he was not. That he said hateful stuff about Somali people who were living in St. Paul when they had emergency calls and stuff. I knew that he was not.
One of the things we don't talk about very much is the pathology of white people. The P word is not used very regularly, but there's a real pathology there that somehow we were able, it's like compartmentalization at its worst, that white people could go to church in the morning and then go to a lynching in the afternoon and not ever think that those two things were in conflict.
Here I was in Louisiana, having just graduated from college, and I was involved in the fight against David Duke when he ran for the United States Senate and for governor. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching 6 out of 10 white people in the state of Louisiana vote for someone they know to be a Nazi. And this is not a word I use hyperbolically, this is truly what he is. And 6 out of 10 white people basically look at themselves and they go, Nazi. Yeah, but I like his stand on welfare, and I like his stand on affirmative action, and I like the fact that he doesn't like black people, is essentially the subtext of all of that. And so they go and they vote for him. And when you see that, you begin to realize that there's really something sick something at the level of a pestilence that is in your community, that is literally sapping the ability of your people, so-called, to think critically and to analyze and to realize what they are doing. When you begin to see that, you see that your community is dying, literally dying spiritually, to be able to go and vote for someone like this, and that you have to save them and you have to save you, because really what separates me from those 60%?
I remember a white lesbian strong leader of a national organization, and she was talking about an interaction she had had with an African-American woman who was on the board, and the African-American woman held more kind of biblical, her interpretation of biblical things around homosexuality being a sin. It was what she had learned in her faith community, and it's what she was holding on to. And this black woman said, "You're a great leader, I really appreciate it. I know you're a lesbian, and you know what my tradition is, it's wrong." And she went kind of into some of her stuff, and she said, "I need you to know that I can't support gay marriage," or whatever the issue of the day was. And my friend didn't give her back much at that time, but was really deeply pained by the interaction. Where the privileging came in is when she was processing it, what it turned to is, yeah, and she expects me to work against racism. The white privilege was used to trump it up, to, I think, try to numb the pain a bit. And then it became a whole different conversation. Then it was this, well, if she's going to hurt me, why should I do anything to, stop her from hurting? And it was almost like seeing the system of racism was going to be taken care of for this woman versus for my friend's humanity as well, and for society.
It wasn't until later in my life that I began to really get a sense of the racism that I carried. My very first year teaching, I taught in a middle school at that time, in Racine. And I remember this one day, this young African-American girl, I had some conflict with her, I don't remember exactly what it was. And in correcting her behavior, she said something under her breath. She said a swear word under her breath that was directed at me. I completely lost it. And I just began to scream at her at the top of my voice. And she's 12 years old, she's tiny, and I'm huge. And I was just aware of all this stuff boiling out. How dare she talk to me like that? And I just obliterated her verbally in front of the whole class. And when that was done, I was sort of taken aback, and I went, oh my God, where did that come from? And I was just really clear how deeply it hurt that young lady. I was shocked at what was inside of me, because I really didn't have a clue.
Deeply rooted in our brains the size of a bird is the mischief of human madness. A make-a-fool superior shadows our daily matters. What this does to each of us in a lifetime is unthinkable. We survive fattened on our innocence, plunging into our buddy-buddy system. I eat crow to not breathe guilty. Crushed cotton grows under my fingernails, gushing land of silk and money. Hard work doesn't pay folks who get offered topless convertibles when it rains. Amazing race washes my single reality. Side effects guard denial. Everyone sees me swinging on a knee. Your duality dangling from a tree. Each invisible moment of your life. I apologize to you for the we who never did and the we who never will.
I felt guilty about the history, things that had happened in the past, and about some things in the present too, definitely. And even though I knew my family wasn't even here, I had nothing to do with slavery, I had nothing to do with colonialism. And some people think, well, why bother? All you're going to get out of this experience is pain. Thinking about these issues, it's deeply disturbing. You're filled with shame, you're filled with guilt. You can hardly bear to look at the history. It's unbearable. So why would I even bother? What's the point? I know it's horrible. I feel bad about it. I wish it hadn't happened. What else am I supposed to do, you know?
What is the legitimate role of white folks in social justice and race and related to race issues and racism? How do we find a line that is, legitimate, authentic work? My initial motivation, actually, when I got this job teaching, was I wanted to teach these white kids that they were racist. Okay, that's another stage in white identity development. You want to blame your own group. It's the way in other words, the way I connect with some sense of purity in myself is by rejecting my own community, which is the white community. And we see white people caught in that. In other words, I have established my goodness by being embedded in a black community, Hispanic community, Asian, Native community. And I also demonstrate my distance from whiteness by rejecting my own group.
I think the main place that I was stuck was I immediately expected people of color to accept me once I had decided that I was going to do this work. So as soon as I might go to a workshop and I might be one of the only, one handful of white folks. And I thought, well, doesn't my presence here, I'm a committed white person. And I could feel the distrust from folks of color. And it was, I was like, I'm here. Like, think of all the other people who weren't here.
I had very much had the feeling of, but I'm not racist, and I've never done anything to hurt anyone, and therefore the assumption that comes with being white and having the automatic in is that you assume that if you're a good person, somehow people are going to automatically know that about you. And that was probably the next step, is learning that people didn't automatically know that about me.
My early religious upbringing actually developed in me some kind of consciousness around wanting to serve. So it's pretty much coming from, I think, serving the underprivileged, which is, a very paternalistic notion as I look at it now. From the position of privilege, as long as you can see that as disadvantage and not even as advantage, you don't critique or analyze your own advantage, you just look at disadvantage, then there's no fundamental reason to question the relationship. You can be comfortable in that relationship of helping the other, and the other stays other.
There is a theory that talks about racial contacts and that it needs to be between equals. And in my mind, that kind of contact, that kind of, oh my God, what a terrible story, that is not between equals.
In college, I once went to an event and I approached a young African-American male who had spoken very beautifully at this gathering. And I said, I want to help. How can I help? How can I help promote change and equality for African Americans and for all people of color? And he just turned to me and he said, educate your own people. And I had a couple feelings there. One, I felt rejected at first. And I felt sad because I felt like there wasn't really a way for me to help. I wanted to be part of his group because it seemed more likely that they would work with me.
Are you ready to go? Yeah! Everybody get into groups. One small group. One, two.
I didn't want to be the bad guy. I didn't want to be the person that causes pain, that causes hurt. I didn't want to be the guy that says stupid stuff that makes people mad at me. So I tried to distance myself from that, tried to deny that I was white. I realized that my struggles around being white and not wanting to be white and trying to run away from it, that I couldn't run away from it. And so the question was, if I have to have this privilege, what am I going to do with it?
This time, you have 1 minute. Make the image of, what should we do, Trev? The second time, we're making the image of racial justice. Here you go, guys. 1 minute. Work together. Racial justice. Work go. Together. No talking, use movement.
I kept hearing from people of color, who's going to work with white people? Why aren't you, who's going to talk to the other white people that aren't here? Like, we need more support, right?
Okay, group one, please form your image of racial justice. Everybody get in a spot where you can see them. If you need to move, go ahead. Do this now.
I didn't want to do that work because that was hard for me, to be able to have to go and have this conversation with my family, right? With my friends.
Like, what would happen to privilege if racial justice actually existed, and is that possible? And I don't know.
I think we can all be bigots. I think being a bigot is an equal opportunity phenomenon. But in order to create a system or systemic, institutionalized privilege, you have to have prejudice plus the power to institutionalize that prejudice, to put it into laws, to put it into actions, policies, procedures.
I was actually just talking to my daughter the other day, the 12-year-old, about white privilege. And she said, well, what's this research you're doing, Mom? And I said, well, it's on white privilege. Well, what is that? And it's like, okay, how am I going to explain this to this 12-year-old? And I have this student that was an old student of mine from Ripon, Leighton. Leighton used to take care of our house. And I said, okay, you know Leighton, right? I have to warn the neighbors that Leighton's taking care of the house so that when they see this large black man going to my house that he belongs there. I said, you don't have to explain to people when you walk up the street to take care of the friend's cat. That's white privilege.
In 1980, I had read 2 essays by black women who had lined it out just like a given. White women are oppressive to work with. And I remembered reading those essays with astonishment. They were so factual about it. White women are oppressive to work with. And I had 2 thoughts in 1980, and I still remembered them. One was, I don't see how they can say that about us. I think we're nice. And the second, which is outright racist, but this is where I was in 1980, I especially think we're nice if we work with them. Then I thought, did we fill the reading lists and the programs and women's studies with white people stuff? And at first I said, maybe, and then I said, yes. And I asked myself, if I have anything I didn't earn by contrast with my African American friends in this building, show me. And I had to pray on it, and I asked my unconscious mind to answer my question. And after 3 months, 46 examples had swum up, most of them in the middle of the night. And if I didn't flick on a light and write them down, they'd be gone by morning, because I didn't want to know them. They were messing up my view of myself as a person who'd earned everything I had.
The pain is about understanding how very deep racism is and how deeply, deeply embedded in our systems it is. But I think what's hard is for those people whose families came from Russia in 1958, or those families who didn't grow up in the South, and people who came from those families who, in fact, were good white liberals and believed that they were doing good things, that it's very difficult to understand how we benefit every day from our whiteness.
David Wellman's definition of racism, system of advantage based on race. And my students read to that point, and then they stop because they get mad. Well, I'm not racist. I keep saying that's not what it says. It says that you benefit from a system by being white. They can't look beyond to the system.
When you're raised in an isolated place where you don't see people of color, therefore you're not going to see the mistreatment that is meted out to people of color. And to a white person who can just watch TV, read a newspaper, and see who's making it and who's not disproportionately, they will then draw their own conclusions and say, well, it's not racism, because I was told if you want to make it, you can. If you didn't make it, you didn't try hard enough. And I look around and I see these folks on the top and I see these folks on the bottom. It must be something about them. It becomes very logical, albeit flawed. I mean, it's wrong, but it's very logical to come to that conclusion.
Another function of privilege is you don't know you have a perspective. You think you're right. You don't see it as a perspective. White folks don't see their reality around race as a perspective. They just see it as true, single-dimensional truth. Like in high school, when I was in high school, we didn't sit around our lunchroom, talking about, we're white.
And I still have people who say, they're just being overly sensitive. I get frustrated with the people who, when we've talked and talked and talked about white privilege, turn around and say, well, what about black privilege? And I talk about the foot race. And a lot of them will get it when I talk about the foot race. That the goal is not to take people of color and move them in front of whites. That the goal is to put everybody on an equal starting line so that everybody has an equal opportunity to get to the finish line. That's what affirmative action is supposed to do. And then I also explain that it's been 40 years. How many years of discrimination are we trying to overturn? and you've only given it 40 years.
When young white people say, and it's a litany of things, they're making a mountain out of a molehill, they're exaggerating, they're hypersensitive, they make everything about race. All of those comments are about being able to have been in this white space for all your life and never have to think about how that was a racialized space, so that when a person of color brings up racism, to most white people, particularly young white people who have no sort of historical memory of race, let alone contemporary understanding, to them it's like, well, race wasn't in the room until you brought it up, right? Race was not a problem until the black person says it, or the Latino says it, or the Asian Pacific Islander, or the indigenous person brings it up. Then race is in the room, because they've, again, never had to think of their space as racialized space, because they don't know the stories of their own parents. How did their parents get that house?
It's very challenging. People get really threatened by the notion that they have a privilege, because I think, it makes them feel guilty. And they want to feel good. They want to feel, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. Why are you saying this about me?
America is the greatest place to live.
No, don't misunderstand me. Look, I'm a good person. I'm not a racist. No, don't
My
misunderstand
family had
me.
nothing.
Don't
My
misunderstand
family
me.
had
No,
nothing.
don't misunderstand
My
me.
grandfather came to this country without a shirt on his back. My family worked hard.
At this white privilege conference in Iowa last year, there was a conversation I had with a young man, and the workshop was on reparations. And so when the presentation part was done and we were ready to have this discussion, the young man did all the typical things. Even though all these people of color in the room had just discussed their own experiences with racism and how severe it was and how significant it was and how reparations were justified and needed. And in spite of all of that testimony, he then proceeded to say, I think that anybody can make it in this country if they try hard enough. We all stand on our own 2 feet, blah, blah, blah. This is the greatest country on earth.
Stop! It's not the same.
He doesn't have a clue. And he's been led to believe this, and his life is this way. I mean, in his world, you work hard, you do get ahead for the most part, because that's the world he's in. He's not dealing with the class barriers. He's not dealing with the race barriers. So at the end of his soliloquy about how, racism isn't really all that bad, I just simply looked at him. I asked him to look around the room at the faces of people of color who had just expressed to him what their truth was. And I simply asked him, what do you think it would mean if these people in the room know their reality better than you know their reality?
These 5 white guys are sitting in the back at a table and arms crossed and obviously resistant. This is a 2-day workshop. And don't engage, read newspapers, do everything they can to tell you we don't want to be here and really we're not here. My co-trainers are Black, Asian, and Hispanic, and they assigned me the task of talking with these guys, making a connection. I got to talk to them about the resistance and asked them if they would share some of what they were thinking during the session, because they hadn't participated. We'd really like to hear from them. I'd like to hear their perspective. And one of the men who was Italian just talked about growing up as a kid in his community. Italians were looked down on ethnically. So he was like the lower echelon, lower level, lower class sort of kid in the neighborhood. When anything happened in his middle school, junior high school, that any problem, the principal would always bring the Italian kids in and ask them, what happened? Your dads are all in the mafia. What happened? Who took the ball? Who broke into the locker? And so he had this history, and he felt like only people of color were being able to tell their stories in our workshop, and that white people weren't able to tell their stories. So the issue is to invite them into a conversation that will start breaking that down at the heart level.
The mirror for me is how quickly sometimes I forget when I'm out in the world what my responsibilities are to be a fair person, and I kind of forget. And I need, it was a reminder that I need to at all times be really thinking and being conscious of what responsibilities I have and each of us has.
There's a deadness in the life I would live according to the old absolutes I was taught about what's good, who matters. Seeing the structures of whiteness erected in me and creating an interior prison state, and deciding to really go with the life of revolt against that prison state. But that's the operation of grace in my life.
Vern leaves the picture, my stepdad, when I'm 14, really abruptly, really hard, and then life sort of disintegrates from there. And then I was trying to keep my mother together. I'm back to helping Mom, but it didn't work. And then one day she wasn't there, she committed herself. And the social workers came for my half-brother and picked him up from daycare, he was 4, and took him off kicking and screaming. He was 10 years younger than me, so he was born in 1967 in January. And, you know, he was a baby, he was a joy, and we loved him. You know, my brother and I just loved him and treasured him. My dad, as much venom and racism and hate and everything he spewed around my stepfather, he loved that little boy. You know, he wanted him. He wanted him to be adopted. You know, he wanted to adopt him. You know, he just felt terrible about what was happening to him and going through the foster homes. And my stepmother didn't want to adopt him, in part. I'm sure some of it was due to racism, and some of it was due to the fact that she was like up to here. You know, she was sort of inheriting a family with 4 just crazy teenagers, 2 different families, and it was just like that was enough. You know, and then to bring a 7-year-old who's been in 30 foster home placements. You know, he was in 35 when I saw him. He was in 4 years. He was in 35 different foster home placements, according to his record. Yeah. He moved to Greenfield, Massachusetts. So I went back there when he was 14. Mostly what I wanted to tell him was that his father was a good man, because I don't know that he had heard anything good about his father. So I told him that his father, in spite of anything that he might have heard, his father was a very, very good man, and very important to me and very important in my life. I saw my stepfather on February the 2nd and 3rd in Tallahassee, and he was sick when I got there, and he died 3 days after I left. And so I went back the next week. And so I get some black clothes, show up there, and of course I'm like the only white person in this church. And so I don't know what the protocol is, so I sit 4 or 5 pews back, and they got the whole family. His wife, Carolyn, and my brothers and sisters and everybody in that front pew. And Carolyn gets up and walks back to my pew and says, "Would you like to sit with the family?" And I said, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, really." I want to end racism because it destroyed my family, and I don't want it to destroy other people's families.
People ask me, like they'll say things to me like, "Oh, that's so cool, you're interested in race. I'm really into animal rights." I don't feel that race or being interested in the subject of race is a cause. It's part of becoming fully human in our culture. And it is a choice that white people can make because they have that privilege to choose to partake in it, to participate in it or not. But I think it, after a certain point, as our awareness and our consciousness about this issue grows, we'll realize is it really a choice?
If it was just about winning an election and helping somebody, you might say, "This is tough, I got to stop." But at some point when you realize, no, you don't really have an option. You may think you have an option, but in real spiritual terms and even physical terms you don't, then you just keep doing it.
At the end of the road, there's beauty, there's freedom, there's enlightenment, and that the pain is always worth it. It's always worth it. You don't want to dwell on it, and you don't want to stay there. You want it to lift you up.
I come to think of myself as a white privileged person, and how do I help other white privileged people acknowledge it and become conscious of it? And not in a guilt-producing way, but in a way that really helps them see that they're part of a system that teaches them to be this way. And how do you overcome this kind of teaching, whether it's becoming a more humble person, but I would say it's becoming a more active person, a person who can convey some of those messages to other people, and that it's not wrong to be a white privileged woman, because that's what I am, and I'm here. But it conveys a responsibility.
I realize that I cannot live in this wildly multicultural society that we're part of if I'm constantly judging, hating, ignoring, putting down people that are different than me.
I was reading something recently about an article in which someone wrote, the first sentence was, I know 3 other people who believe that we can end racism in our lifetime or in this century. And I was thinking, oh, well, I'm number 4, because I feel like we created this. And I feel like, yeah, it's been a couple centuries worth, and, it could take longer to undo it, but I feel like it doesn't have to.
If white people don't stand up and don't learn to be allies to people of color, we definitely are going to have a very, very difficult time ever attaining anything even remotely resembling a just community. And we may not get there anyway. I mean, it's very possible that racism will never be, sort of fully eradicated from this or any other society, but we are certain that it won't be if we don't do the work. And so given that choice between the absolute guarantee of defeat and the possibility, however remote, of justice and reclaiming your humanity, I'm going to opt for that and do whatever it is that needs to be done to increase the odds that by the time I'm taken out of this place, that I will, that I'll be able to look my children and my grandchildren in the eye and say something to them, and give them something meaningful.
It's about intimacy across lines that society doesn't want crossed. And with a human being that everything in society wants you not to be present with, because there's power in that connection. Intimacy is this radical concept that when we can get there, either as allies across our lines that have been so inculcated from such an age, there is power to change the world with that. There's incredible power.